G'day everybody, welcome back to the pod. Matt Walsh, Jake Michaels and Champion Data's Christian Jolly here to talk all things grand final and Brisbane's stunning premiership triumph. We've got heaps to review. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of how the game was won and lost, plus some legacy discussions and a whole lot more that will fold in throughout. Jake, welcome to you. We'll get straight into it. Something you noticed from the grand final?
There's so many things. I feel like everything I noticed we're going to talk about at some point, but yes. I want to focus in on Joe Daniher. It was the most Joe Daniher game, was it not? 2 goals, 4. He had some great moments. He had some shocking moments. But you know, he's a player you love to watch, and a player that you just know what you're going to get every game, except that you don't know what you're going to get from him every single game.
You know that you're going to get inconsistency.
Exactly.
Almost.
But that's what makes him such a special player. But the thing that I really loved about Joe Daniher, and yesterday he was the only player on the ground to play 100% game time. Did not come off the whole game. He was the only player both sides. And just looking back over the last 11 weeks, it's been a trend for him. And I understand people say, well, he plays as a key forward, and key forwards, key backs generally stay on the ground for quite a long period of time. But he doesn't just do that. We know he goes into the ruck and pinch hits and runs around in the midfield as well. So the last 11 games, he's played 1,389 minutes of a possible 1,393 minutes. He's been off the ground for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So he's played 99.7% of game time in the last 11 games. I think that's extraordinary. I don't think we give him enough credit for probably his fitness to be able to do that, because as I said, it's not just standing in the goal square for 4 quarters. It's working up and down the ground and obviously going into the middle as well.
Totally. Yeah, you sometimes see key backs with those sorts of numbers, but they're not sort of resting in the midfield or going into the ruck. So yeah, very impressive and good. Something you noticed. Christian, something you want to bring to the table?
Yeah, again, like Jake said, I think the whole point of this pod is to talk about what we noticed from yesterday. But I'll start with one of the big focus was Heaney, Warner, Goulden had to have great game for Sydney to have any chance. We sort of see the result in the end. But you look at their first half across the game, and we were across this at halftime in the Champion Data offices and things of passing around, first half analysis. 5.3 combined rating points between Heaney, Warner, and Goulden at halftime. Second worst half of any half this season. It matched their 5.2 that they got in the second half in the Port Adelaide game in round 21. So at halftime, you could already look at those numbers.
That's the 112-point loss.
Exactly. You look at those numbers and think, well, the only time these three have been that bad was when they were beaten by 112 points. Mm-hmm. It was already dire from halftime. Before halftime, you could see how little impact those three had.
Yeah, I've got the word dire written down a few times here on this run sheet, so we'll see how many times we bring that out about the Swans. Hey, we said we were going to keep receipts last week on Tuesday.
Is this something you noticed?
Yes, it is. We said we were going to keep receipts. Well, it's something we all notice, I think. Yeah. But we said we we're going to keep receipts about how the post-match medal ceremony goes.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And how the players go with the Auskick kids. Mm. And you were very vocal, Jake, I remember. You said someone at Sydney or someone at Brisbane needs to sit them down, the entire playing list, look them, eyeball them, and say to them, do not forget to shake the hand of the Auskick kids. And guess what we saw after the Brisbane win on Saturday?
Well, I'm guessing you saw the same thing, but it looked like Brisbane had someone employed. I'm sure that wasn't just what they were doing, but they had someone there on grand final day handing the caps out to each player as they were coming.
But stopping each player.
And making a note. I mean, you couldn't really hear what they were saying, but you got the impression it was, make sure you give the kid the hat, shake their hand, and don't look like a total flog on national TV.
But there was one player who didn't shake the hand of the Auskick kid. Charlie Cameron, unfortunately, and you're going to have to go hard at him because you said you would, but he grabbed the medal from the Auskicker, put the hat on the head pretty poorly, and then walked off without the handshake.
I think I'm agreeing with you. We'll wait for Jake to sort of tee off on him, but he did get caught. He did get caught up in the Country Road song as well. So I think if you got that,
good enough.
Exactly. That's why he sort of went to his song rather than to his kid.
So I've got another little excuse, if you want to call that, for him. So Cam Rayner went before Charlie Cameron. He was the player before.
Is that right?
Yeah, 16 to 23. There's no
right? Okay. Something you noticed.
Yeah. So he went before, and he was coming off, and they sort of shared a bit of an embrace, a hug, right in front of the guy handing out the caps and giving the... So as they hugged, you can kind of go and watch it back if you've got that much time on your hands, but he kind of hugs him and grabs the cap at the same time. So he probably was the only one, Cameron, that didn't get that message.
I can't believe you're making excuses for
Okay,
him.
but this is my point. Do you really need that message?
No,
you don't. I mean, that is Charlie Cameron, absolutely embarrassing.
Straw poll. How does it rank compared to McCreary and to Tom
it's
Stewart?
nowhere near as bad as McCreary. McCreary, Tom Stewart, I mean, absolute couple of numpties. I don't know what they were doing, but it just tells you the kind of person you are. It really does.
Oh, goodness.
Who snubs anyone, let alone a 4 or 5 year old kid, for the 2 seconds that you have to go up there? It's just embarrassing.
Well,
every year we see it. Even when we have someone doing this, we still see it. It's just totally insane.
Well, we were talking last week about punishments for people that did do this, and I think you guys might have said tongue-in-cheek, take the medal off them or something. But there was one that sort of caught my eye yesterday. Is the one that was who was the most horrible one last year? You just mentioned his name,
Bo McCreary.
Yeah, Bo McCreary. So when I saw the grand final sprint names get released, and he was one of the names.
He was invited back.
I already thought, well, there's one punishment you can have. If you're not great enough on the dais, you can't come back the next year in any sort of official capacity. He not only got into the grand final sprint field, and then he's won it as well. And I thought, this is, in terms of punishment for last year, he should, you've won the sprint, but we're not going to give you any sort of prize.
Do you know who win for the sprint?
No idea.
Gatorade? I don't know. But I was waiting for the call me celebration.
Turn it up.
And I was also waiting for him to try and find an Auskick kid to go and snub.
Stiff arm.
Yeah, not good. You said that for 4 or 5 year olds, a lot of these Auskick kids. Dane Zorko's kid was taller than he was.
Yeah, she was very tall.
Fair enough. All right, let's get cracking. Plenty to analyse. Obviously, look, not the greatest game from a neutral's perspective. It was Brisbane 18-12, 120 to 9-6-60 Sydney in the end. The old double,
Yes.
which must be pretty rare. So
Yeah.
doubling of each score. Their first premiership win since... Sorry, do you want to say something?
I was going to say Scorigami, which I just found out.
And Scorigami, yeah, love that. Their first premiership win since 2003, of course. And while they've been thereabouts for a number of years now, it is a lot of reward for hard effort. Even this year, Jake, we kind of have touched on it, but they were 0-3. They were 2-5. They missed out on top 4 with really poor late performances, like their loss to the Giants and that loss to Collingwood. And then in the semi, they were 44 points down to GWS, 25 to Geelong. So more than 4 goals down to Geelong in the prelim at the MCG. This really shouldn't have happened. As in the premiership is quite an unlikely turn of events. Given
It highlights their mental toughness. It highlights their resilience. It's as you say, you can look at it and there's so many reasons as to why they shouldn't have won it. But then there are so many reasons as to why they should have won it. And Brisbane's been the best team in the competition for 6 years now. They've won more games than anyone else. They've played in more finals than anyone else. They've now won more finals than anyone else. And I think using the word deserving in any sport is often a bit... You deserve what you get. Yeah. It's sport. We find winners and losers all the time. But I think Brisbane did deserve this. If you look at the last 6 years as a block, they did deserve it. It would have been weird if this window closed and they never won one because of how consistently excellent they've been. I mean, the last 6 years, at minimum, they've made semi-final weekend. At minimum, they've won 14 games each year. That's an extraordinary level of consistency at the highest level. And I think it's just rewards for someone like Chris Fagan, who earlier in the year was under quite a bit of scrutiny, particularly when they had their slow start. And it wasn't just the 0-3 start. I think there's 4 things everyone looks at to look at the resilience of this team. The 0-3 start, the loss to Collingwood in the second last game of the year that kissed goodbye the double chance, the 44-point, trailing the Giants by 44 points and trailing the Cats by 25 points in those 2 finals. But the other part of it, which people sort of forget about, is at their second bye, they had only won 4 games. Yeah. 4 games. That is a horrible start. And Christian was just looking at it's the fewest wins a Premier has had through 10 games since 2000. So they, at that point in time, you can rewind. You can rewind to so many moments of the season. When Lachie Ash kicks that goal for the Giants to put him up by 44 points, I mean, you can write your own ticket on a Brisbane premiership. There's no way. It's just there are so many moments throughout this year where you just thought there's no way. Go right back to Kadeem Coleman, first game of the season, ACL.
I mean, the Vegas drama, the Chris Fagan in the racism saga.
There's been so many things, and it just... I think the players would say that it just makes winning it so much sweeter. And that's just looking at this season. We haven't even spoken about last season. You go back 364 days, I think it was, to last year's premiership, to last year's grand final, and losing it in heartbreaking fashion to Collingwood. I think it's so hard to back up from a premiership loss, and
Yeah.
we see teams all the time, not just ones that get smashed in a premiership loss, a grand final loss. We see teams all the time
Struggle to back it up.
struggle to back it up, and not just struggle to back it up, but fall off the face of the earth. I think so much credit needs to go to Chris Fagan. So much credit needs to go to the leaders of that football club. And as I said, I think they are such a well-deserving club to win this year's premiership.
And you talk about, it's not an age between drinks, 21 years, 2003 to 2024, but in that period in between, the Lions have been through a lot. They've been some really, really dark times for this club, and they were playing in front of two men and a cat out at the Gabba, maybe crowds of 11, 10,000.
That might be being generous.
I think most people looked at it. If you go from 2015, so 2015 4 wins into 3 wins the next year, 5 and 5. Turn that around. So that's in 2018 they had 5 wins, and then in 2019 they've gone 16 wins, 14 wins, 15, 15, 17, and another 14 across the home and away season. It's just the 4 or 5 years of just couldn't win more than 5 games in a season. That isn't a lifetime ago. That is only 5 or 6 years ago that we've seen them turn around and become such a powerful club.
And it wasn't just, the win-loss record was probably a byproduct of it, but the players, players didn't want to play there. They obviously had the players wanting to leave. It was dire. There's that word again. How many times we'll have the dire counter on the players didn't want to play there. The fans didn't want to show up. And, I was saying to you before, as listeners are probably well aware now, 3 Carlton supporters sitting here. But, watching the Brisbane teams of the early 2000s was really when I first started getting into watching football. And they were the powerhouse side. They were the gold standard team. And, you see them have that dynastic run, winning three in a row, and then obviously going to that 4th one. And then it all falls away. And then they've been able to build it back up again and win another premiership in a totally different era, totally different set of circumstances, and promise this will be the last Carlton mentioned. But Carlton they haven't been able to do it. So I don't know, is it a tick for equalisation? Does any sport do it better than the AFL for equalisation? Because I think things can go from horrific to top of the world in such a short period of time. And you only need to get a draft right, or you only need to have a signing, or things can make drastic differences.
The caveat here is there have been Northern Academies. So the Swans have been able to regenerate and rebuild with some concessions.
Yeah.
The Lions too have had concessions as well. Father-sons, the Norm Smith medal winner coming to the club for a packet of peanuts, and they're going to get the next son for a packet of peanuts as well. So, the AFL, great at equalisation, but the Lions are benefiting.
I understand, but Will Ashcroft didn't play the back half of last year, and they were this far close from winning the premiership there as well. So, no doubt they have, but there's also, if we're going to be fair, we know that there are parts of being an interstate club playing in New South Wales or playing in Queensland, which makes it tougher than they're having to play. I mean, this is not the right example because they were both from outside of Victoria, but obviously having to play finals, travelling every second week. So there are things that's certainly not easy.
Yep.
But I think equalisation works. I think talking with Jared Barker before we started, the whole idea is every team wins one every 18 years. Now, that's not to say you win one and then Brisbane's going to win in 18 years from now, but that's the idea.
That's the goal.
That's the idea.
To me, when I look at equalisation, it's across the last 15 years, every single team bar Gold Coast has made a preliminary final. So that's where the equalisation is a huge tick for me. Yes, grand final is the biggest day, but
only 2 teams playing it.
When we come back next year and do the podcast and we start analysing the game from round 0, 1, 2, whatever they start the season, we know that clubs' first aim is to make prelim week. That is the first thing they're aiming for. So
why
I don't know. I think it just gives you again. I've noticed a shift in the last 3 or 4 years. When you hear player interviews, coach interviews, it's all about the prelim is sort of that get us there, and then and we'll take the next step.
I think it's hard.
And I think that's where again going back to the equalisation. I think that's where it's a huge tick to have every club to have reached that stage.
I think aside from the team that wins it, so going to next year Brisbane, it feels like any team the season's a tick to make a prelim.
Yeah.
You feel like it's hard for it to be seen as a failed
Final
season
four,
if you don't.
It's a great high watermark.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, interesting. We should talk about the game because it was interesting, even though it was a blowout. We talked in the lead up to this game that Brisbane had the blueprint of how they wanted to play, of how they could beat the Swans, and we talked about how their controlled style of play would actually match up well against Sydney.
But also, Sydney had the blueprint as well.
Of course, they had the blueprint. But Brisbane have been able to do it. They did it last year against the Pies and just fell short with their controlled style of play. Uncontested possessions, uncontested marks. But it's exactly how it played out, Christian. Mid-year, the way to beat the Swans was to take uncontested marks. And Brisbane liked doing that. So that's their strength, clearance and uncontested ball. And just from just about the outset, that is exactly how they dominated the Swans.
Yeah, so against the Swans, you want to try to take 100 marks, and it's going to almost not guarantee you a win, but it's going to give you a very good chance to beat the Swans this year. And for Brisbane, when they got close to 100 marks or 110 marks across the last 4 or 5 years, they don't get beaten. At quarter time, Brisbane had already taken 42 marks for the game, and had already sort of, hadn't put the score, hadn't run away with it on the scoreboard, but I was watching that game thinking Sydney are not in this game at all yet. They'd kicked the first 2 goals from, a little bit of, I think it was 2 ground ball gets almost got on both of those goals. But at the end of quarter one, we spoke about all last week, control is going to play more into Brisbane's hands, chaos is going to play more into Sydney's hands, but they could both sort of match it if it was a closer game. It was, control-wise, there was 75 marks across the first quarter, 42 of those were for Brisbane, as I said, and 37 ground ball gets. So the game was in twice as much control as it was chaos. That is way too far out of Sydney's favour to, that was way sort of up into Brisbane's strength and way too far away from, way up into Sydney's weaknesses area, if you like.
And that breeds a lack of pressure. When you have the ability and the time to get the ball, gather the ball, use the ball, have uncontested marks, uncontested possessions, it means the Swans aren't getting close to you. Yep. And their pressure factor was abysmally low.
Well, that's why in the first quarter, Lions sort of sucked him in. The pressure factor across the game, 183 usually, goes up to about 187, 188 in finals. First quarter, Swans were at 157, very, very low, but the Lions were at 159. So the Lions were happy to sort of go, because as I said, the Lions took 42 marks and the Swans still took 33 themselves for that quarter. But Brisbane sort of made it a low-pressure game and just the game sort of looked more on their terms. If it's going to stay uncontested and chip around, Brisbane seemed to do that a lot better than Sydney. So quarter time, they're both sitting there, very, very low pressure. It's about, okay, now that the score's still close, who's going to increase their pressure first? Who's going to be able to bring the heat and stop the other team from getting uncontested possessions? Second quarter, the Swans, they went from 157 pressure to 161.
Still low.
Their own pressure improved, but it's still way below comp average. Lions went up to 213. We talk about 200 being an elite number and trying to get to that. Usually when you get to 200, it invites your opposition get to about 190, 180. So
differential,
161 to 213 in the second quarter. That's a 52 pressure factor difference, if you want to put it that way. It's the biggest differential in any quarter of a grand final we've ever recorded, and about the 5th biggest differential in any quarter this year.
So it's no surprise we saw a 7 goal.
Well, 7 in a row, but
and it was that whole first quarter, Lions weren't looking to put pressure on. They were just sort of happy to maintain possession and get control of the game. Second quarter, they smashed in, put pressure on, and the Swans couldn't keep up. So looking at the Swans as well in pressure, it all came to a 4 yesterday, and it looked shocking. So their 4 quarters, they were 157, 161, 156, 156. None of those 4 quarters did they get anywhere close to the competition average. Finished with a pressure factor of 158. They're 3rd lowest in the club's history. We've been doing pressure since 2010, so a good 15 years.
3rd lowest game ever.
3rd lowest game
what's
for
that?
Sydney.
14, 15 years times 24 on average.
And
it's their 3rd lowest ever.
And to sort of put that into perspective of how damning that was for them, and probably their pressure has gone for the last 10 or 11 weeks. Last year, number 1 pressure side for pressure factor across the year. Round 0 to 11, when where they finished with their second bye or so. They had their second bye in round 12. So round 0 to 11, they were the 3rd best pressure team in the competition. Go away for their bye, take stock, sitting on top of the ladder so far ahead of everyone else. We sort of spoke about maybe dangerously too far ahead of everyone else, going by previous, history of sort of saying if you're that far ahead in the ladder at round 11, you don't always win the premiership. But they take stock, they go away for a week, and you think you work on parts of your game and you sort of want to come back and sort of re-establish yourself after the bye. They dropped to the 3rd worst pressure team from round 13 onwards this year. So yes, it was horrible in the finals, in the grand final yesterday. But when you take stock and look over it at the whole thing, it's like that is something that they lost. And whether it's as simple to say, sitting so far ahead of the ladder when you go for the bye, did they lose that hunger for the second half of the year and just not be able to get that back on grand final day?
I think we will transition back to Brisbane in a sec. But while we're on Sydney, if I'm a Swans fan, I'm absolutely livid with that performance. Like we spoke about 2 years ago how dire that was. But I think we
There it is
made...
again.
Yes, I did. But I think we made sort of, a few sort of allowances. The fact that a lot of these players were young. It was Geelong felt like they were an overwhelming favourite in that game. I don't think anyone expected the margin to be what it was, but that's what happens in grand finals. The team gets on top, and then the gulf grows. This was totally different. They didn't show up, and as you said, I don't know whether it's a case of they got too cocky with what they were doing, felt like they didn't need to put the pressure on, but
Felt like it beat them their own way.
That's just totally embarrassing. Like, I just don't understand how for the second time in 24, 25 months, you can play one of your worst games in the biggest game of the year. 45 tackles for the game. 45 tackles.
And then on top of that, 45 tackles is quite low. 31 turnovers by foot as well. So they almost turned it over by foot more than just being able to apply a tackle on the opposition.
So
So even both ways, the low pressure, and then when you had the ball, they were just
still weren't
butchering
doing
it.
it. Yeah,
so early
Pressure
as well.
and tackling is effort, but skill execution and turning the ball over
when-
that many times. So it's 31 turnovers per foot, that equal most of any game this season for the Swans. So it almost beggars belief. And this is a team that traditionally when we talked about it, they have a back half sort of game. When they were going out of defence, when the pressure was on and Brisbane were really threatening in that second term, the ball's coming out of back 50 with these high loopy things that just really couldn't penetrate, and it looked like the teams were in a completely different weight division. It was, don't want to use the same word again, it was really poor.
It's really dire. You touched on it before about the marks. I think, what was it the first quarter? 42. They took 158 for the game.
Yeah.
That's an extraordinary number.
Crazy
22
numbers.
of them were inside 50. So there's pretty much 22 shots at goal.
Most marks taken inside 50.
They were they were just all uncontested. They just found space, and I think, as I said, going back to the tackles, 45 they laid to Brisbane 65, which I always find, how can you be minus 20 in tackles when the opposition is getting their first hands on the ball and they're smashing it as they are, or as they were. 11 of Sydney players laid 1 or 0 tackles for the game. Just not good enough. Nowhere near good enough. And some of their key players in that too. You look at the forward three as well, which I think people have had question marks on. And rightly so.
Yeah.
McDonald, Amati and McLean combined for 8 kicks and 1 point. Like that, I understand some of the entries weren't great, but it wasn't as if they had 40 fewer inside 50s. Do you know what the difference was in inside 50s? Brisbane 51, Sydney 49.
Well, Sydney also had only 3 players that didn't sort of record a score involvement for the game. That was Joel Amati, Logan McDonald, who obviously got and Braden Campbell, who got subbed on. But 2 of those are your key forwards who didn't.
Hipwood, who's been like one of the most maligned players in the league for a number of years, and to be fair, like it's not. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, he won a premiership now. He's a great. Eric Hipwood still remains one of the worst contracts in the AFL. Like period. I don't think anyone's debating that. But credit where it's due, he kicked that goal, and that was better production than Sydney got from the other 3 for the entire game. And I just think, is it a problem? Like is having those 3 guys that you can't really rely on any of them an issue for Sydney going forward?
How do you answer that when they finished first on the ladder? And the stat I keep going back to, number 1 scoring, they were the most potent team once they got it inside 50 in the end. So whether that was because they had a lot of shots from outside 50, yes, but they were still as good as anyone once they got it in there with that personnel.
But we talked about it last week. The contributions from 3 players from the midfield made up almost half, more than half.
So
Warner, Heaney and Goulden are kicking the same amount of goals as Marty, McDonald and McLean.
Yeah. But so
that
that's
can't
what I'm saying,
happen. Like I know that those
it's not
3.
Sustainable.
I know those 3.
But how do you? I'm putting my Sydney hat on and saying, when you go into a grand final, everyone's sort of screaming out, "These are your 3." You still look at it and say, how can we make any changes to our forward line that's been the number 1 scoring one? So yes, the off-season I think is a big time for him to look at it. But I was quite we can talk about the Logan McDonald injury. That's he got that one completely wrong. But I was a bit surprised with how much people were sort of calling for these 3 heads leading into the grand final. Yes, you're all justified now because they got smashed, but I still sit there and go, I don't think there is any way Sydney could have actually taken one of those 3 out of their team.
There's no alternative
at this stage of the year. Yeah, they needed to do it at round 17 or 18 if they wanted to do it.
I agree with
not
that.
on grand final week.
Is there an argument to be made that Sydney is better off with one, not even superstar key forward, but one really good key? Would Sydney trade these 3 players for Harry Mackay in this off-season?
You're jumping the gun on justifieds, but
I'll get there. Not free. I don't think he can. I think, you could trade 2 of them for a star or something, but I think you still need a secondary
Which
tall
club's
forward.
doing that trade, though? If I'm Carlton, I'm looking at
Carlton's
Amadi, McDonald and McLean. I'm saying no thanks for Harry Mackay.
Yeah.
Which sort of tells you, I guess, where Sydney's key forward system is at, right?
Yeah. We haven't really seen a team, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we seen a team win a premiership or even get close with 3 guys, like 3 players like that? Who?
Collingwood. Name me Collingwood's great key forward last year that carried them through.
But they did, exactly. They didn't have one.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about 3 guys, but it was more when it hit the ground, like ground level. That's where they did the damage. These 3 guys aren't going to hurt you at ground level. McLean, Amadi, and McDonald aren't hurting you at ground level. So they're kind of just like 3 key forward guys that aren't really good, that don't really kick goals and don't really do anything else. And I just don't know. Like, I get your point. It's like, it's not like they've had a season where they finished 15th and they've been terrible. It's like, well, we've got to do something different. If the game goes the other way and they win, then it's, everyone's got to follow this model. Hey, you don't want to have 1 star key forward. You want to have 3 okay guys. But they didn't.
No, that would not have happened if Sydney had won yesterday. You look at that and go, that is Sydney's team. As Carlton, I'm not going to try to copy that key forward lineup. I think you're reading too much into making that comment.
I just don't
if Sydney
know
had
if
won,
having those
that's
3
how
guys,
we're all going to build our forward lines. No, that is how Sydney
maybe not
built
build
their
the forward line, but I just don't know if it's the word you use, sustainable. I don't know if it is. I don't know if they can go all the way with them. Maybe they can because they've gone close, but I don't know.
We'll drag the attention back to Brisbane.
It just does feel like they need more production out of them.
I think I agree with you. Dragging it back to the Lions for a little bit. Who is built different this week with thanks to PointsBet? Well, it has to be Lachie Neale, doesn't it? Highest rated player on the ground.
Are you asking me?
35 disposals, 9 clearances and a goal assist. And he revealed after the match that he heard a snap in relation to his pesky plantar fascia issue that he's had. Jake, it begs the question though, was he stiff not to win the Norm Smith medal?
He probably wasn't stiff. I think I had him a nose ahead of Will Ashcroft, but I don't think you can. I think no matter what, one of them had to win it. They were the 2 best players on the ground, in my opinion. But what I will say with Lachie Neale is, so there's it's not really a quirky rule, but it's a rule nevertheless. When you cannot take advantage from a mark, I don't think people fully understand this rule. People always say, why are they bringing it back? If you can't take advantage from a mark. If someone takes a mark, the ball spills out and then you run off it, you can't do that. It has to come back to the mark. Where it's a free kick, you can take advantage. That's where we see goals kicked from frees as an advantage. Go back to 80 seconds into the game. I can't remember who took the mark.
Cameron,
he missed.
Cameron, yeah, you're right. Cameron took a mark. Neale, the ball spilled out. Neale picked it up, snapped a goal. They brought it back because obviously, as I said, you can't take advantage from the mark. If you could, let's just play hypothetical for a moment. If you could, Neale kicks that goal. He finishes on 36 disposals, 19 contested possessions, 9 clearances.
Goal assist,
everything else. He's clearly the Norm Smith medalist, I think, because they're already like that. That goal puts him in front. He wins the Norm Smith medal. I know you always say that one moment or one game shouldn't or doesn't affect your legacy, but it does. Like, it does for everyone, whether we like it or not. He would now be a 2-time Brownlow medalist, a premiership captain, and a Norm Smith medalist. And he would be, whether you like it or not, one of the 10 greatest players of all times by resume. Period. Now, I know that's he's not. I know. I understand that, but I've said it all year, and I've said it for probably since he moved to Brisbane. I still don't think Lachie Neale is rated high enough.
Fair enough. What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, visit gamblinghelponline.org.au. Christian, Brisbane, we got the contributions from the stars. We just talked about them. And the role players stepped up as well. We talked about Lachie last week and his game this week. But the Lion Cubs deserve a shout out as well. So when you look at sort of players under 22, you had Kai Lohmann thrived on the big stage, 3 early goals and 4 total. Logan Morris took some important marks in the front half, kicked a couple of goals. Darcy Wilmot, Jasper Fletcher contributing throughout the affair. And of course, Norm Smith medalist Will Ashcroft, who wasn't even fit until halfway through the season, coming back from that ACL injury. 35 clearances and a goal. I mean, pretty good as well, to be fair. It feels like their young crop overachieved compared to what we've seen from other young crops on the grand final stage. That was just the eye test telling me that. Is there anything we can look at that sort of backs that up at all?
Yeah, so if one of, I've used rating points for this, so that only goes back to 2010, so it takes a little bit of, still a good sample size, about 15 years, but doesn't go all the way back to all grand finals. But looking at all grand finalist teams, whether win or loss, the most under 22-year-olds we've seen in that time in a grand final team was the Bulldogs had 7, and in 2016 they had 7 players under 22 or under on the day, and Melbourne also had 7 in 2021. So they were sort of a team with a bigger bunch of youngsters. But as you mentioned, Brisbane had the 5, Ashcroft, Loman, Logan Morris, Wilmot and Fletcher. Between them, they averaged 11.4 rating points in that grand final, which is the second most of any under 22 group in a grand final. The only group higher than them was...
Sorry, they averaged or combined?
Averaged 11.3 between them. So
pretty good.
Yeah, 19.3 to Ashcroft, all the way down to... Again, ratings, I don't agree with this one. 3.5 for Jasper Fletcher. I thought he was much better than that, but I mean, you've got to go back and probably look at where he was moving the ball. Probably wasn't as valuable, but had a good 16 touches for a young kid and looked okay. But he was sort of their lowest rated under 22. So the only team that's had a better bunch of 22-year-olds or under playing in a grand final was Sydney 2012, who therefore, they averaged 12.2 rating points amongst their 4, and it was Hanbury, Alex Johnson, Luke Parker, and I think I mentioned the 4th guy to you before.
You did? Oh, off the top of my head, trying to remember.
I've got another sheet here. It was Sam Reid.
Sam Reid.
So you know Parker and Hanbury, what type of careers they had. Alex Johnson is, we forget about him.
Yeah.
And he was on track to sort of be one of the prime intercept defenders in the competition at such a young age. And Sam Reid was pretty solid key forward. So looking at these guys going forward, and again, looking at the positions, you got Ashcroft, who sort of has played wing this year, but we know he can be a centre bounce midfielder. Loman is your small forward. Logan Morris is a key forward. Darcy Wilmot as your running defender, and Jasper Fletcher as your, again, like Ashcroft, your link up outside player. Almost 5 positions where you can just plug for the next 10 years and know where your production's coming from.
So Ashcroft had the 4th most rating points of the 91 players to have been under 22 on grand final day. I'm assuming since rating points came into existence.
Since 2010,
And he's the youngest Norm Smith medal winner of the AFL era. I mean, the very first one went to, I think it was Wayne Harms, 1981 maybe. But that's a phenomenal achievement, Jake, for someone so young and who's been out of the game for 12 months with an ACL injury.
Well, that's it. That's exactly what makes it even more remarkable. The fact that he didn't play for so long, and who knows? Who knows? They could be back-to-back premiers if he plays.
Well, they pick up another bloody Ashcroft next year.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. And I wrote about this after the game. I think you look at Brisbane, they're the 3rd by age this year. They were the 3rd oldest team by average age of teams selected throughout the year. 3rd oldest. I think that's a little bit misleading when it comes to... Yeah, so Dane Zorko obviously blows it out a little bit, but I also think that's a little bit misleading when it comes to where is this list right now? Because you spoke about the 5 guys that they've got under 22. Throw in Levi Ashcroft, who by all reports is going to be just as good as his brother. So they're tick, 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 tick for all the young guys. Then you look at the guys in the 24 to 27-year-old range. I won't reel off every name, but I did in the story. And there's half their team is aged between 24 and 27. Even players that you think are old, like Harris Andrews and Josh Dunkley. They're in their mid-20s. Yeah. Like, they're not old. It's really, the only guys that are going to start next year, 31 or older, are Zorko and Neale.
Leicester.
And no, I don't think he'll be 31.
He's 32, I think.
Are you sure?
Oof, okay. I can look that up while you're...
31... it may be a 3rd, but Neale and Zorko.
32.
Neale and Zorko, 2 All-Australians this year.
Yeah.
2 of the best players on grand final day. It's not like they've got old guys that aren't performing. So I think they're very well positioned for another couple of years at least.
Yeah. I'm always hesitant to talk about back-to-back. I think it's incredibly hard.
I don't want to talk about back-to-back. I think we always...
But contending...
Everyone always thinks the Premier is going to win it again and again and again. It never happens. Yeah. But contending, absolutely. There's no reason as to why they would fall off. As I said before, at the top, they have been the gold standard team of the last 6 years. And so what makes us think they would fall off now?
And you go back to those first 10 rounds, and we're sort of saying, 4 wins was the fewest any Premier had at that stage. Go back to the first 10 rounds if you're an opposition team and go, okay, why was Brisbane so bad in the first 10 rounds? How are we going to get them next year? Oh, and you look at their spreadsheets, it comes out that, they kicked at the worst accuracy and opposition kicked at the best accuracy. Yeah. And you try to find another hole in those first 10 rounds and you couldn't find one. You couldn't find one in Brisbane's game. So.
Fair enough. Back to the Swans. So since the 2012 flag, it's now 4 grand final losses, 3 of which have been by 10 goals or more.
Oof,
They're starting to get a tag of being the big game chokers under John Longmire, and it's hard to argue against it given what we've been able to see when they've been on the biggest stage. How do you think another loss like this and the ill-preparedness that we've discussed about, the dire situation, how does it affect John Longmire's legacy as a coach?
How does it or how should it? I think they're two different questions. I think people will now look at John Longmire as someone who can't get it done on grand final day.
Fair or unfair?
Fair in some respects, but at the end of the day, like he's, as I've always argued with coaching, he can only do so much. Now, the effort, I don't think effort is a coaching thing, and we've just spoken about it. Let's look at the last two, because off the top of my head, I don't know how many were playing in 2016, but there wouldn't have been many. Maybe 5 still playing that played in the 2016 grand final, so not many players. Let's look at the last two that we've seen in the last couple of years. The effort was so non-existent. I don't know how you can pin that on him. When he's done everything throughout the whole home and away season to get his side in the position to fight for a premiership, and they've let him down, and they've let the club supporter base down entirely. I think, as I've always said, I think too much credit is given to coaches that win it, and we smash coaches that don't win it. I think it needs to be somewhere in the middle.
And I'm with you. When I look at a coaching performance, it's probably easier to judge a coaching performance when the game's still in the balance in the third quarter. So you can look at maybe, going probably a bit harsh to bring up Adam Kingsley in 2 weeks after, but you look at Adam Kingsley's coaching performance after giving up a 44-point lead, and maybe when you go through with a fine-tooth comb, you can find issues there or things that he changed or was slow to react. The way the grand finals are played out for Sydney, they've been over so early that it's not like you look at Longmire and you think, oh, he's just made the wrong moves, or he hasn't lost it in the coach's box at all. They've lost it as soon as they've run out there and almost started the game in nearly all of these 4 instances that they've lost. So I struggle with it. I think it's very unlucky that, he gets drawn into it. I still would prefer to put his legacy in terms of how many games you win to get to the grand final, which makes him a great coach. Because on the day, as I said, all 4 of them, I don't think there's been any... We'll get to maybe the injury selection is probably the one that you can sort of look at as being a poor selection. But you look at all the coaching performance on the actual day, and there wasn't anything he changed or did wrong. It was just, as you said, his players didn't rock up. Yeah.
So how does this affect a playing group, do you think, when you now look at, and there are players, look at Warner and Heaney, these guys that have been involved in 2, maybe 3.
Rampy.
Yeah. How can you mentally try and go and rise to that summit again? You're a minor premier. You started the year so strongly.
We know about the grand final curse, which we haven't spoken about much this year. But
we haven't talked about it.
It's at 40 points. If you lose by 40 points, you don't make it the next year. It happened to 2022 Sydney. I will probably not be tipping Sydney to be in the top 8 this year after finishing number 1. Based on this, it has just stacked up for 25 years that you get beaten by that much in a grand final.
And haunt you not because it's just the one time; it's twice in 3 years. I'm a pretty mentally resilient person, but gee, that would mess with me.
Well, I think the first thing you put up on the whiteboard of day 1 of pre-season is Brisbane. Like, I know it was not the same thing. Brisbane didn't get beaten by 10 goals. They lost by 4 points in last year's grand final. Yeah. But that's equally as hard to come back from as well, in my opinion. Like, I don't care if you lose grand final by a point or 100 points. You make the argument it's harder to come back after losing by a point. You're so close. And they came back, and it's all the adversity they face that we've touched on ad nauseum already this podcast. So I'd be surprised. I understand that history suggests, and I understand every year you can probably say there's no way they can. I'd be surprised if they didn't make finals next year. But just on Longmire quickly, what really frustrates me is people criticising him and saying, he's 1-4 in grand finals. To me, it's insane to just look at that number and look at that as you've failed as a coach on the biggest stage. I think that's totally insane. To me, it's the old LeBron James versus Michael Jordan argument of, well, Michael Jordan's 6-0 in NBA finals and LeBron is 4-7 or whatever he is. So you're telling me it's better to lose in a prelim or a semi-final and not make the grand final, and then if Horse won in 2012 and never got back, that's better than getting back 4 more times and losing. It's just insane. Yeah. So no, you obviously want to go further as far as possible every year. I think there are some things you can look at and say, as you said, some selection things. We've spoken Sam Reid. We've spoken about before. Logan McDonald, Callum Mills. There's little things like that. Maybe players should have played, maybe players shouldn't have played. But I think on the day, as we said, I think there's 99% of it is on the players. And if the players aren't putting the pressure on, and the players are, if Isaac Heaney is turning over 5 of his first 6 kicks, if the pressure isn't there, the tackling's not there, I don't know what John Longmire is supposed to do aside from putting on a jersey and running out himself.
Fair enough. It's time for Is the Hype Justified or Is it Hyperbole? Jake, the Lions' run in this year's final series eclipses the absurdity of the Dogs' 2016 run.
I think it's justified. I never thought I would think that I never thought we'd see a team that had a better run in finals than the Bulldogs. I really didn't. That was the most remarkable 4 weeks of football I can remember. But I think this tops it. And I don't think that's being a prisoner of the moment. They were the favourite to beat Carlton at the Gabba, which I gave Carlton a bit of a chance. Turned out to be probably not the right call.
I think we blow over that game 70-0. I know Carlton we're not ready and they're coming off and unfit and injuries and that, but that is when Brisbane really made a statement and put their foot down. Exactly. Like I think everyone sort of put it more on Carlton or how poor Carlton was. Like, hang on, this was the sign that Brisbane were primed for a big final series.
Yeah, no, 100%. So they won that game, and cue in the rack third quarter. But then to win 3, I know it's the deficits they had to overcome within those games, the first 2, not the grand final. But to win 3 games, 3 finals in succession on the road, that's never happened before. Never happened. Only one other team, I think Adelaide in 98 won 3.
3 interstate, but got a home game in the middle.
No one's ever gone road final win, road final win, road final win, premiership. It's never happened before. So I don't know how. Then you obviously add in the other parts of it, the deficit they overcame in the 44 point, the 25 point. I don't know how you look at it and say it isn't. It hasn't gone ahead.
Counterpoint would be maybe that the expectations coming into the season were much higher on the Lions, and the Dogs probably weren't instilled as anywhere near premiership favourites at the start of 2016.
No, but the Dogs did win 14 games in 2015. It wasn't like they were a 6-win team that then had this massive bounce the following year. They played finals. They lost a heartbreaking elimination final to Adelaide that they played better in for most of the game. And they were thereabouts. I think I get that Brisbane, there weren't many people picking at the Bulldogs to win the premiership in 16. There were a lot of people picking Brisbane to win it this year, but I don't know. I don't know how you can look at it and say it isn't with everything that they overcame over the last month.
Christian, one for you maybe. Chris Fagan winning the flag shows there's room for AFL coaches who never played at the highest level.
Yes, probably does. I think it does. I don't know why you need to have played at the highest level to be a coach. It's still hard for clubs to make that call and things like that. But yeah, I think was he one of the first? He was probably one of the first to really get the job without being...
Bolton had one as well.
But he was sort of, without...
That's a few going back.
Yeah, I suppose he came from Hawthorn, didn't he? I was sort of say, coming from another... Brisbane hadn't had him under their wing for 5 or 6 years and gone, hang on, we should make him coach. They actually went and got him from another club and installed him as a coach rather than going through, assistant with us for a while. So I think it does if you can find the right person. And but I think there is... Chris Fagan's name seems to get linked to David Noble. David Noble and Chris Fagan and Greg Swan all come into that club, and I think those 3 positions being filled around the same time all go hand in hand with each other. And I know that the other 2 aren't as round like Fagan is now, but I think the way they set up that club when they all got there, I think they all deserve as much credit as each other. But yeah, I think if you can find the right person for the job, it doesn't have to be an ex-AFL player.
We did sort of talk about this, but let's put it on the record and be quite definitive about it. Sydney's number 1 off-season priority is to find a key forward, and they need to overpay to get one. Yeah,
I think they do. I mean, the midfield is stacked. The midfield looks like it's set for the next few years. I think probably, to be honest, probably bookends it. But I think Tom McCartan is a really good player. I have no issue with Tom McCartan, but they probably need... But how do you do it? I know I've sort of floated out before. Is it a case of moving on from the 3 guys we spoke about before to try and bring in someone who is a top
Would that
level?
Be seen as a knee-jerk reaction?
Maybe, and maybe it is.
Yeah.
And to your point, maybe like they were the best team all year. This time yesterday, they were the best team all year. They were the favourite to win the premiership. So maybe it is a knee-jerk reaction to say got to move on from them. But the problem is you can't. They were getting 3.5 goals a game from Heaney, Warner, and Goulden. That, to me, is the part that probably isn't sustainable. I don't think, as good as you could tell me those three players play as well as a collective next year, but they only combined for 52 goals instead of 86 or whatever it was. To get 80-something goals out of those three players is just... I don't see how that can happen again. So if they're not kicking the goals, and Marty, McDonald, and McLean are combining for sort of 75, they need to find another avenue. These three guys should really be combining for 120 goals for the year.
And I 100% agree that in this off-season they need to get better. Every team needs to get better, but I was just more on making that call yesterday to take one of those out was the wrong time to do it. But this off-season, definitely, you would, as a Sydney supporter and as a Sydney list management team, you'd want to go into round one next year with a different looking forward, with maybe one or two more dynamic, either even if just a mid, like another Will Hayward type role size. And then I look at defence as well. They don't really have that loose intercept marking defender. Blakey is a playmaking defender, but he probably doesn't intercept and come in as that third man defender as well as some of the other clubs have.
Use the term defender very loosely with Blakey.
A backman. He plays from the back line.
He's a forward who plays in defence.
Yeah. Final one before we wrap things up. Christian, after winning the Norm Smith medal, Will Ashcroft is a bona fide superstar.
Yes, I think he is in terms of his footballing ability. He might not have the superstar profile yet, but he's not too far. Now with the Norm Smith medal, it'll definitely help. People will start to realise that. And again, I would love the viewers. This is one that I can't think of. If anyone can hit us up on the socials with this one. A guy to win the Norm Smith medal after missing the previous year's grand final through injury.
God, the stats man asking for a stat.
Well, it's not a stat, is it? It was just a good redemption arc for him in terms of he was the Harley Reid of last year. This kid has come in and he's so good and clean day one.
Yep.
That knee injury and the 12 months off, everyone's forgotten about how well this guy has started his career. I think he is a superstar. He might not have that profile yet. Give it to round 10 or 11 next year where people just realise this guy is the cleanest, most smoothest one of the cleanest and smoothest ball movers we've seen in the game currently, or if not ever.
Will Ashcroft is not a superstar. He had a great game yesterday, worthy Norm Smith medal winner. As I said, I probably would have gone Neale just by hair, but
So that's where your biases lie.
No, but I'm happy that he got it. I think he totally deserved it. I wouldn't have cared as long as one of those two got it. But he's not a superstar. What are we doing? Like a superstar? There's 12, 14 tops in the league. Will Ashcroft is not one of them. He may well be one in a couple of years' time. But if Will Ashcroft is a superstar, then Jason Horne-Francis has to be one. Harry Sheasel has to be one. Harley Reid probably has to be one.
I think Harley Reid will be, and
I
think that's why Ashcroft
he's not yet.
Got his nose ahead of Harley Reid, and people forget about that.
Will Ashcroft's kicked 11 goals in his career. He's not a superstar. He's not a superstar.
Is Jacob Wiedering a superstar?
No.
Are you buying
you can't be a superstar if you don't kick goals.
You can, but Jacob Wiedering's not on the team to kick goals.
But don't tell me he's kicked 11 goals. So that's
he's
not an argument.
He's played 30 games. He's not a superstar.
Right, that's fair enough.
He's just not. He's not yet. He probably will be. I think we use that word too much with too many players.
And I agree with you in terms of the profile. I'm looking at more. If I'm looking at all the 820 footballers and who are the best at it, I'd have him in my top 15, 20 easily because of where he is in his career.
You'd have him as a top 20 player going into next year.
I think, yes. In terms of his footballing ability, not what he's done, not his resume.
No, that's fine.
What he can do on a football field, yes. Yes, I would. That's
extraordinary to me. You'd have him ahead of Horne-Francis?
I don't know. I've got him in my top 20. I haven't done my top 20 yet, but I don't think Horne-Francis will be in there, no.
Let's bring it back to the game. I think probably, look, again, like I said, neutral's probably not the best game, but when you think about the Lions story, we sort of talked about it, the domination, the way that they stuck to their guns and how they play the footy and executed. One of the better performances I think we've seen on Grand Final Day for some time, and they well deserve their kudos and congratulations for pulling off the premiership win.
Yeah, and special shout out to Alex who produces this podcast, who mad Brisbane supporter. He's come in today early on a Sunday.
I got a text in the early hours of the morning asking what time we were recording.
Yeah, so no, he enjoyed it, especially after last year's heartbreak. So yeah, I think it's nice. It's nice to have those redemption stories. I think from a neutral point of view, I'm surprised I don't know how long we've been going. 45, 50 minutes? You have not mentioned the name Katy Perry yet. I'm surprised.
Me?
Yeah.
Why are you surprised at me?
I don't know. I just feel like you're all about the entertainment and
All about the
stuff.
entertainment.
Yeah, you
Entertainment's
like
on
that
the
sort of
field.
stuff. What do
But
you think?
Katy Perry doesn't take anything away from the on-field
I don't.
entertainment.
Does anyone?
Katy Perry was really good. I thought the spectacle was fine. It's never going to be Super Bowl levels of investment.
Well, because it's during the day.
No. It's because of the money. I'm sorry. It's the money.
What's the date?
No. The Super Bowl, the NFL has a bottomless
fireworks during the
pit,
day.
a bottomless pit to spend on the show, whereas the AFL does not.
I understand that the NFL.
We're not opening up a day versus night discussion.
Okay, but I understand the NFL has more money than the AFL, clearly. But the spectacle, two reasons. One, the ground is so much bigger, so everything looks further away.
I agree with that,
weird.
yeah.
But two, daytime, everything looks... What concert have you ever been to that's in the daytime? Of course it's going to look lame. You got fireworks going off, you can't even see them.
Okay, but now you're talking about the concert being the thing that everyone's there to see. Everyone's there to see the footy.
Yeah, I understand, but footy also looks better at night.
No, I disagree with that. Keep an ear out. There'll be some off-season content coming, especially with the draft creeping up. We'll get Jasper Challoper on. He's got heaps of stuff, and it's a stacked draft. Oh. I know we talked about Levi Ashcroft, but there are players everywhere, so your club will be bound to be picking up someone very, very interesting. So keep attuned to that. The AFLW
season
part of the pod continues, but look, thanks for coming on the ride so far this season. We're not wrapping up for the year, but we are kind of
more shows here and
tying
there,
a bow around the season itself.
Yeah, we'll have some stuff around draft and trade, and and maybe
it's been good fun.
Maybe just a little tease, an off-season special.
Oh, have you floated that with me?
Just working on a few little things in the background.
Christian, thanks for your contributions. We'll probably have you on again, but just in case we don't. Good to have you. Jake, I'll be obviously speaking to you very, very soon. To everyone who's jumped along for the ride, thank you so much so far. We'll speak to you in the next pod.